So we need to shift from traditional change activities to MVC. And when we refer to MVC, the thing is with traditional change management activities is that in an agile world, things like what we communicated yesterday can change today. We know that. I see Mish nodding her head in the background. She's constantly faced with that challenge as the head of or the lead communications person for the Cobus's program. Screens for training constantly change because as a new sprint happens, there's changes to drop downs. It changes continuously. Your time for upskilling people is largely reduced. And then, of course, in addition to that, is that the pace of releases is a lot higher. So if we have a look at MVC and how we can address this, we're saying as much as Agile has got an MVP, which is what is the minimum viable product, we are saying for change management, what is the minimum viable change that we need to do to help facilitate and ensure readiness? So that is what are the smallest possible change activities that we can do to drive buy-in, to ensure that there's learning and skills transfer and that there's readiness. So let me just go to our panel members just around some questions for minimum viable change, which is what is it that you've been doing to actually ensure that the change activities you're implementing are MVC based? So Cobus, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think through our engagement with the relevant parties in here, I'm talking about product owners, I'm talking about process engineers, and your business analysis people. If those people carry the story of what needs to be delivered. So we need to be in on that engagement to understand that. And the beauty of this entire thing is it's not the full truth and nothing but the truth, all depending on where you are in the process. So what is the best truth you can take to people? And I want to go back to one of our previous audience members who said trust is absolutely vital in this equation. So it's the promise, but I trust you that what you're sharing with me now is a first glimpse of what I am going to enjoy. So never keep it till the very end because then it becomes a surprise. So whatever is available needs to be packaged in some sort of a format or an artifact that it leads me into this new conversation or it leads me into a first perspective of what we are going to enjoy going forward. So I think as long as we can give them that bite sizes of exposure, I want to call it, with supported by some sort of an artifact or a clickable of some sorts or a little video or never longer than 2 minutes in any case, people will be part and parcel of that journey. Call that then the minimum viable change components along the journey.
Thank you very much for that, Cobus. And Linda, from your side, so Linda has been working with one of the banks on setting up self-managed teams. And although they aren't agile practitioners, everything that's being implemented is being done in an agile way. So Linda, what stories can you share with us around implementing MVC with driving self-managed teams?
I think what was so fascinating is understanding the current maturity level and environment that we're dealing with and looking at what that end state is in terms of the transformation that needs to take place from a people maturity perspective, from a principles perspective, from a cultural and a communication perspective. And the gap between the current and to-be state is huge. And there is no way you are going to be able to drive or to get to that point unless you do it following an MVP approach. So what we've done is we've looked at stages of development, and we're looking at performance, we're looking at quality assurance, we're looking at behaviors, we're looking at leadership, And we basically said, okay, so across all of these 5 stages, what are the key sort of like benchmarks that we're going to be driving towards? And so the way that we're also selling then is it's a lot easier for the stakeholders to understand right now, because I think there's no way that they can currently perceive what stage 5 looks like in terms of where their current state is. So we're taking them on a journey, and each phase has got a number of iterative growth elements and shifts that we need to achieve and for us to get to that stage 5. So I think they've been a lot more responsive because they can actually see the shifts that are going to need to happen. It's not just, well, here you are, and this is where you're going to need to be.
Thank you for that. So what we're saying is, even from a culture change perspective, you can adopt an agile approach. And then, Rodney, just from your side, is how have you maximized buy-in and readiness using MVC?
We have what we call demo days, but we've since changed that to movie days. Those are days when we actually are showcasing those demos. We send a ticket to each participant to say, this is your movie ticket, but guess who's staring? It's you. You are the lead actor. The point I'm trying to put across here is that we use those days to invite all those important stakeholders, not just the users, but the line managers and everybody else, to begin to see what we're working on right now towards what we've been promising them. It is so practical because it's driven by their teams. The users are there. The subject matter experts are there to demo everything. And it's also an opportunity for people to learn how to use the solution. And what has given us much traction is that the CFO is part of that. He can see what is happening, at least after every release. That's how you generate that trust that one of our practitioners spoke about them. Once we have that trust, they will begin to give you space to do what you should be doing. So for us, we're using those demo days to say, guys, this is the minimum that we can present to you right now, but look at what it can do. And the best people who are driving that are the users. But as a change person, you sit there, observe the dynamics, look at the sources of potential resistance, and have your resistance management plan in mind to say, how do we maximize these engagements, because it's from top to bottom. In other words, it's one session where all the key stakeholders are there to have one version of the truth at that point in time. So that has been very helpful for our projects, Debbie.
Very good. Thank you so much. I just actually want to ask the audience, just move forward, if you've got any questions around how to actually create or prepare for minimum viable change. Any questions for the panel? No? All right.
Can I just
Yes?
quickly share something?
Yes.
And, quite often, and I spoke about being subservient, and that's not where we want to be. Quite interesting, and whilst we're talking about minimum viable change, so in this process where there was still no application available or no system, so we created this upfront clickable prototype. Yeah, and it was a first glimpse of what it's going to be like. It was a matter of when they saw that, and I'm talking about program management. They took it to the first steerco. It was demonstrated. It was almost in big lights, and the next minute they took it to the board. This is what your solution is going to look like. At that point in time, it was rather fake. But it was a first glimpse.
Yeah.
It answered some sort of part of the promise that was out there awaiting us. But minimum of nature, as long as it stays as closely as possible to the truth.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Some tremendous learnings around for learning and development. What is the minimum viable change that needs to be put in place? So, things like clickable demos, giving people a taste of what's to come, but not the exact thing that's to come. So if we have a look at MVC and tips and tactics that you can practically use taking back into your workplace, is to say always start with the high-level structure, and you can add the details as you go. So that's your starting point. It's about living through the changes and adapting to the changes. Then, of course, your stakeholder expectation management, you'll see that's come through in pretty much every section that we've discussed. It is so important. Then select what your minimum viable change activities are. So we spoke about, you want to be able to drive that readiness, the learning, the communications. What are the minimum things you need to do around that? So for communications, I'm going to state the obvious, but communicating what it is that they need to know right now, not what the nice to knows are. Just be concise. What is it that they need to know? With your training, prepare what you can on your training material based on, for example, let's say if it is, with a technology solution, the screenshots that you've got at a particular moment. Then, when you're ready for that release to go out, is just have a few release notes supporting the training material that you've put in place to say, these are some of the changes to the screens that have taken place. You don't need to update everything. We're all highly skilled when it comes to technology with our cell phones and the updates that we get there. We also need to trust that to a degree. And then, of course, very importantly, is also choosing to do the right things at the right time. So this is about using your head around, based on your engagement with the users, is what do we need to give them right now? What is the minimum viable change and those change activities that we need to use right now to ensure that there's that readiness? So just to share with you, in summary, the 4 take-homes that we've had a look at are, number 1, we need to be driving this agile mindset. We need to be working with our stakeholders and ourselves to say, are we stuck in the old way of doing things, or are we adopting an agile mindset? And we've said that we need to focus on both the mindset around being agile and the mindset around doing agile. Then, of course, very importantly, is agile change delivery. So the way in which we implement change also needs to align to the agile way of doing change, using the same language, using the same methods. Then our design for change management activities needs to be focused around our customer. So, for example, we need to have those relationships with the agile teams where we say needs to be packaged into a release that is can be consumed by our end users. And then lastly, having a look at how do we actually make sure we put in the least effort, but with the maximum impact on our change activities, so that we're not bombarding people because we've got so much change landing at any one time. What are the MVCs that we need to put in place to drive that learning and readiness? So one of the things that I'd like to ask you please to reflect on is, as we leave here today, and as we wrap up with the panel discussion, because from here we're actually going to go into a workshop after the break for those of you who are staying with us. But walking away from here, just reflect on what are the things that you are currently doing, but what are the things that you aren't doing? And what is just one thing? What is just the one thing you're going to do differently when you go back to the workplace this afternoon? That's all. Start with one thing and see how that goes.